Chapter 12. When we came in the sight of the house, the girl stopped for a moment and stared at it. Does it look familiar? I asked. Have you ever seen it? She shook her head. I've never seen a house that big before. Rich people must live there. It's where I live, I told her, but we're not rich. She pointed at the junk in the field, which was easier to see now that cold weather had stripped the leaves away. Look at all that stuff your people threw away. Only rich people would throw away so many good things. As we drew near the house, the back door flew open and Mom ran towards us. Erica, she cried. Thank you, you're home. We have you. Where have you been? She stopped a foot away and dropped her outstretched arms. Who are you? She said. Where did you get my daughter's clothes and her doll? Lunging at the girl, Mom grabbed little Erica out of her arms and clasped the doll to her chest. She looked as if she was about to collapse from disappointment. The girl reached for little Erica. She's mine. Auntie gave her to me. Ignoring the girl, Mom turned to me. What's the meaning of this? Why have you brought her here? How did she get your sister's things? Her voice rose with every question, as if she thought I'd played a cruel trick on her. She was hiding in the old cabin where Dad took pictures last month, I told Mom. She says her aunt gave her the clothes and the doll and told her to leave. She was finished with her. Oh, no, no, no. Still hugging the doll, Mom sank down to the porch steps. Erica, she cried. Erica. She put her head on her knees and sobbed. Please, I held the girl's cold little hands. If you know anything, please tell me. She darted an ugly look at my mother. She's got to give my dolly back. Auntie, give her to me. She's mine. Just then the kitchen door opened and a woman stuck her head out, a stranger. Oh, thank goodness, she said. You found her? Mom ran past the woman and disappeared inside, holding the doll and crying. I heard her pound up the back stairs to her room. The woman stood in the doorway, puzzled. That's not Erica, she said. I shook my head. I found her hiding in the old cabin up the trail. She's wearing Erica's clothes, but... The woman came down the steps and looked closely at the girl. What's your name, honey? Where do you live? I'm Girl. I live up yonder with Auntie. She pointed toward the trail that led to the cabin. Only she didn't need me no more. She said so herself. She gave me these clothes and told me to go home. But the onlyest home I got is with Auntie, she began to cry again, washing more streaks of dirt down her face. The woman knelt in front of the girl and cupped her face in her hands. It can't be, she whispered. It can't be. What can't be, ma'am? Girl peered at the woman, her face creased in worry. Never you mind. It's just my mind wandering. The woman got to her feet and said to me, You must be Daniel. I'm Mrs. O'Neill. I believe you've already met my husband. Taking the girl's hand, Mrs. O'Neill said, Let's take this poor child inside and give her something nice to eat. Hot soup, maybe? She looks cold and hungry. Mrs. O'Neill led the girl into the kitchen and settled her at the table. While she opened a can of chicken soup with rice and poured it into a pot, the girl looked around. My goodness, she said. You told me you ain't rich, but look at the things you got. Nothing's broken or busted either. It's all clean and new and shiny. Well, how could I tell her that Mom complained about the old-fashioned gas stove she had to light with a match, and the refrigerator she had to defrost, and the ugly white metal cabinet she hated, and the dripping faucets, and the black and white squares of cracked linoleum covering the floor? Mrs. O'Neill made toast and poured 2 bowls of soup, one for the girl and one for me. Then she sat down with us and studied the girl. The girl's manners were terrible. She slurped and slopped the soup, holding the bowl with one hand as if she thought I might take it from her. She stuffed the toast into her mouth and almost choked. It was like eating at the table with your dog or something. When the girl was finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and blew her nose on the napkin. Mrs. O'Neill stroked her tangled hair. How would you like a nice hot bath? The girl frowned. I don't much care for baths. Let's go upstairs. When you see the tub, you might change your mind. Mrs. O'Neill led the amazingly docile girl up the back stairs. I waited to hear yelling and screaming and thuds and thumps and door slamming, but instead the water ran into the tub and all was quiet. I fixed a cup of hot chocolate and stood at the kitchen window. The wind was blowing harder now, and the short day was running out of light. The second night without Erica was almost here. After a while, Mrs. O'Neill came downstairs carrying the girl. She changed her from a scary little wild creature into an almost normal kid. Her hair had been washed and combed, her face and hands were clean, and she was wearing one of Dad's old plain flannel shirts, last seen hanging on a hook in the bathroom. It fit her like a nightgown. like a long nightgown. She needs to rest, Mrs. O'Neill said. I don't want to put her in your sister's room. Can she sleep in your bed for a while? I hesitated, but where else was the girl to sleep? At least she was clean now. Reluctantly, I led the way to my room. By the time Mrs. O'Neill laid her down, the girl was asleep. Covering her with a quilt, she looked at her in the dim light. You poor child, she whispered. Where have you been all this time? What happened to you? Do you think she's Celine? Let her sleep. We'll talk downstairs. Mrs. O'Neill led me into the hall and closed my bedroom door. Glancing at Mom's closed door, she said, Don't wake your mother. She's exhausted. I followed her back down the back stairs to the kitchen. Now it was dark and the wind blew harder. It tugged at the corners of the house and wailed as if it wanted to come inside. The sound made me cold all over. Help me lay out the food, Mrs. O'Neill said. The men will be back soon, cold and hungry. Women from town had sent casseroles, sandwich platters, cakes, and pies. It surprised me that they'd cared enough about us, the outsiders, to help. Except for the O'Neills, no one had made any effort to welcome us until now. While we set out dishes, Mrs. O'Neill said, We knew Celine Estes, John and I. He told me that Celine was best friends with your daughter. I looked at her. But she'd almost be 60 years old now, and that girl upstairs appears to be my sister's age. How can she be Celine? Mrs. O'Neill shook her head. When I first saw her, I was struck by her resemblance to Celine. It wasn't until I bathed her that I began to think she really is Celine. Not only the same hair and the same eyes, but even the same birthmark on her shoulder. Maybe she's faking it, I suggested, play acting a story everybody knows. That doesn't explain the birthmark. Mrs. O'Neill paused to set the ladles for the macaroni and the baked beans. The trouble is, she went on, I can't think of any other explanation for your sister's disappearance and this child's appearance. Maybe I was as crazy as everyone else in this valley, but the more Mrs. O'Neill talked, the more I began to think the girl upstairs might actually be Celine Estes. In this valley, anything could be true, even a conjure woman walking the hills with her pet hog and stealing a girl every 50 years. It happened before, you know, Mrs. O'Neill said. When Celine disappeared, the search party found a little girl in the woods. Nobody knew who she was and she couldn't tell them. What happened to her? Mrs. O'Neill sighed. They put her in an orphanage. She wouldn't eat or drink. In less than a month, she died without ever saying who she was or where she came from. But somebody remembered that a child had disappeared 50 years previously. So it seemed the old stories were true after all. I was about to ask more questions, but the sharp sound of barking dogs scattered my thoughts. I ran to the window. The day had ended and flashlight beams sliced the darkness, illuminating a tree here, a man there. The search party was coming back. The back door banged open and Dad led a group of men into the kitchen, big men in work clothes, stomping their feet, red-faced from the cold, talking in low voices. Where's your mother? Dad asked me. Before I could answer, Mom came stumbling back down the back stairs, still half asleep from the look of her. Have you found Erica? She gazed around the room wildly, her eyes flitting from one person to the next. Where is she? The searchers drew together, holding sandwiches, but too polite to eat them. Dad drew Mom close. I'm so sorry, Martha. Mom beat her fists again against his chest. You didn't look long enough. You must have missed something. You. She collapsed against him. He held her up, kept her from falling, stroked her hair, and tried to comfort her. Believe me, ma'am, Mr. O'Neill told Mom. We searched every inch of these woods. We didn't find a trace of her. Neither did the dogs. Mom turned to me. Where's the girl you brought home? The one with Erica's doll and the one wearing her clothes. Ask her where my daughter is. Make her tell you. Everyone in this room seemed to stop breathing. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the tick-tock tick of the kitchen clock and the wind rattling the window panes. What girl? Dad asked, looking from Mom to me. What is she talking about, Daniel? Before I could answer, Mrs. O'Neill said, She's talking about Celine. Daniel found her. She's upstairs sleeping. The group of searchers huddled together, half-finished plates of food in their hands, and mumbled to one another. I heard Celine's name once or twice, but their voices dropped even lower into whispers. Men shook their heads. They looked worried, frightened even. A couple of them made excuses and left the house. I heard a car start, saw its headlights, watched its taillights as it sped away. What's wrong? Dad asked Mr. O'Neill. Why are they leaving? It's the girl, he said slowly, as if answering the question embarrassed him. They're saying the old auntie's got your daughter and there's no use looking for her. While Dad stood there flabbergasted, the last three men thanked us for the food and drink and edged out of the back door. In the yard, engines revved, headlights lit the field, and in a couple of minutes the search party was gone. Mr. O'Neill turned to his wife. Maybe you should get the girl, bring her down, let Ted see for himself. Mrs. O'Neill started up the back stairs, and I followed her. Stopping at my closed door, she tapped gently, so as not to startle her, she whispered. When no one answered, she opened the door and peeked inside. The window was wide open, and the curtains blew like streamers in the cold air. Mrs. O'Neill ran to the window and looked out into the night. All that moved were the shadows of the trees tossed by the wind. She must have gone back to the cabin, I said. Someone should go after her. Mrs. O'Neill shook her head. There's not a man from these parts who will go near that cabin at night, not even the police. Every one of them grew up here. They've heard stories all their lives about old Auntie. Most of them swear they've seen her in bloody bones in the woods or alongside a dark road. I watched Mrs. O'Neill hurry down the back stairs, and then I took a quick look around my room. A sweater and a pair of jeans I'd left on a chair were gone, and so were my old running shoes. I tiptoed across the hall and checked Mom's room. Little Erica was gone, too. I went to the top of the back stairs and listened. Mom was crying, and Dad was calling the state troopers. Surely they don't believe in this superstitious nonsense, I heard him say. Mr. and Mrs. O'Neill were talking in low voices. It sounded as if they were cleaning up the kitchen. Taking care to make no noise, I crept down the front stairs, grabbed my parka and hat from the coat rack.
Zelia Fawcett, come to the
Sorry.
office. Zelia Fawcett, come to the office, please.
From the coat rack by the door and slipped quietly outside. For a second, I hesitated. What if I got lost? I needed someone to come with me, someone who knew the way. Brody had refused to go near the cabin in broad daylight, but maybe I could talk him into going to the top of the trail with me. It was a long shot, but who else could I ask?